She was 21 years old when she was shown out of the only home she had ever known, with a bone folder in her coat pocket and $6 folded into the hem of her skirt. $6 and a tool that most people would not have known the name of, and nowhere in particular to go. What nobody in the town of Heron Crossing understood. Not the neighbors who watched her walk out with her flour sack and her rolled blanket. Not the man in the good wool coat who had arrived from Sudbury with a solicitor's letter and a look of quiet satisfaction. Was that somewhere north of the Mattawa portage, in the stands of black spruce and white birch that nobody much went into after October, there was an abandoned mail relay cabin that had not been opened in 3 years, and that Faye Callender would be the one to find it, and that what was inside would change everything she thought she understood about luck and grief and what a dead man can leave behind. Settle in close. This is the kind of story we don't come across often, and we want to tell it right. Faye's grandfather, the bookbinder Elias Quorn, had come to Heron Crossing from the Ottawa Valley when Faye's mother was still small, drawn north by the promise of steady work supplying ledgers and bound records to the timber offices and the land registry. He had built the bindery himself at the edge of the main street, a low cedar plank building that smelled always of hide glue and linseed oil, and the particular dry warmth of a cast-iron stove worked hard against a northern winter. Faye's parents had died of scarlet fever when she was 9, one in March and the other in April, and after that it was only the two of them in the rooms above the shop. Elias never spoke of it as a burden. He never spoke of it at all. He simply made room for her at the work table and handed her a bone folder and showed her how to score a page along the grain so it folded clean and true without tearing. The bone folder had belonged to his own teacher, a bookbinder in Perth named William Foss, who had given it to Elias when he was 17 and setting out on his own. It was carved from the shin bone of a deer, smooth as soap from decades of handling, with a pointed tip for scoring and a rounded heel for rubbing down spines. It was not beautiful in any conventional way. It was useful, which Elias considered considerably better. For 12 years he taught her. He taught her to sew a signature and press a board and cut leather on the bias so it turned corners without bunching. He taught her to read a cartographer's grid and to identify land grant markers in the margins of survey maps, because the timber offices often brought him old survey folios to rebind, and he had always believed a person who worked with documents ought to understand what documents said. He taught her to measure twice and trim once, and never, under any circumstances, rush a drying press. He taught her that a job done plainly and well was worth more than a job done cleverly and fast. He died in early November quietly, in the chair by the window that looked out onto the street, with his reading spectacles still on his face and a cup of tea gone cold on the sill. She had expected, in the way a person expects things when they have no reason yet to know better, that the bindery and the rooms above it and the tools she had used every day of her adult life would come to her, because she was the only one who remained, because she had run the shop alone for the last 2 years while Elias's health had been failing, because there was no one else. She had not known about the half-brother. Clement Quorn arrived on the Wednesday coach from Sudbury, a trim man of 50 with close-set eyes and the particular confidence of someone who had spent the journey already certain of his welcome. He introduced himself to her across the work table with a handshake and a solicitor's letter, which he laid open with the care of a man setting down a strong hand of cards. He was not unkind. That was the detail that stayed with her longest. The careful courtesy of it, the effort he had made to be decent about something that was not, in any real sense, decent at all. He explained that the property had passed to him, by blood and by law, as Elias had left no will, as these things were sometimes arranged when a man was elderly and did not think to make formal what seemed obvious. He offered her a week to gather her things. He offered her the contents of the till, which amounted to $6.40. He offered to let her keep one set of bookbinding tools, as he would have no use for them himself. She kept the bone folder. She kept the paring knife. She kept the brass awl with the turned rosewood handle that had been Elias's daily tool for 20 years. She kept a coil of linen thread and a cake of beeswax, and a folded square of bookcloth she had cut herself and not yet used. These were small things. Clement Quorn watched her pack them without comment, because he did not know their names, and he had already begun calculating what the building might fetch if offered to the right buyer, in the spring. She shook his hand when she left, because Elias had taught her, without saying so, that a person who walks out of a room in anger tells the room exactly how much it hurt them. She did not intend to give Clement Quorn that information. She thanked him for the use of the kettle, which had been hers. She walked north out of Heron Crossing because north was the only direction that meant something to her. The trapper's supply post at Lac Brûlé was 4 days on foot, and she knew a woman there, a postmistress named Orla Fetch, who had once brought in a torn route ledger for repair and had lingered to talk for nearly an hour about the northern mail routes and the difficulty of keeping records in a climate that had no patience for paper. It was not much to go on, but a person asked where she is going ought to have an answer ready. The country north of Heron Crossing was shield country, black spruce and tamarack, outcrops of pink granite worn smooth by the last ice, shallow lakes with clear cold water and portage tracks worn down by generations of passage. She had walked some of it with Elias in summers past. She knew the shape of it. She did not know the November shape of it, which was considerably different. The cold came down out of the northwest with real intention after the first day, and the birch trees had long since gone bare, and the sky sat flat and gray as a pressing board and gave nothing away about what it intended to do next. She walked the way Elias had walked, each foot set with attention, not hurrying, watching where the ground was soft. The flour sack rode over one shoulder, the rolled blanket under her arm. The bone folder sat in the breast pocket of her coat, against her ribs, and she was aware of its weight the way you are aware of something that has always been there. She thought of his hands, the way they moved over a page with authority and gentleness at the same time. The way he pressed a spine with his palm, as if he were feeling for something only he could detect. The way he had set that same palm on the top of her head when she was 10 years old, and he did not know what else to do with a child who was trying very hard not to cry. She did not cry now. The cold made it impractical. She filed grief, the way Elias had taught her to file difficulty, not out of sight, but set to one side, where it would not interfere with the work of getting through. On the third morning, she came around a bend in the portage track and stopped. The cabin was small and half buried in the spruce. Cedar shakes gone silver with weathering, a porch with one post rotted clean through and leaning, a government mailbox on a wooden stake, painted red once, now the color of old rust, with the door swung open on its hinge and a swallow's nest gone dry inside it. The track to the door had been used by animals more recently than by people, and the single window was dark, with years of dust and cobweb and silence. She stood at the edge of the portage track for a long moment, watching the cabin and listening for anything alive inside it. There was only wind in the spruce tops and the distant knock of a woodpecker somewhere to the west. She went in. The inside was dim and cold and smelled of mouse and old wool and something else underneath, paper, and the dry mineral smell of a stove that had not been lit in a very long time. A bunk frame with no mattress, an iron stove, a shelf with 2 tin cups, a stack of firewood, long since seasoned to the condition of stone, and against the back wall, hanging on a wooden peg, 3 mail bags of heavy canvas, buckled shut. Beside them on the floor, a surveyor's case of oiled leather with a brass catch. Beside that, a tin box. She had worked with enough land registry documents to recognize a surveyor's case. She had handled enough government paper to know that the contents of one did not end up in an unmaintained relay cabin for any ordinary reason. She lit the stove with birch bark from the bottom of the wood stack and a match from the tin she carried in her pack. She worked steadily and without hurry, because rushing a stove in the cold is how you end up with neither warmth nor fire. When the iron had begun to tick and the room had begun to come back to itself, she sat down on the bunk frame and opened the surveyor's case. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth and tied with waxed cord, was a roll of survey documents, 3 folios and a covering letter. The folios were land grant certificates bearing the proper stamps of the Dominion Surveyor's Office. The letter was addressed in a careful hand to the land registry officer at Lac Brûlé, and it explained that the attached certificates were the original proof of claim for 200 acres along the Brûlé River, wrongly contested 2 years prior by the Pemberton Timber Company, and that the originals had been in transit to the registry when the mail route had gone dark. She set the folios down and opened the canvas bags one by one. She was not looking for anything in particular. She was trying to understand. The bags held the ordinary wreckage of 3 years of interrupted correspondence. Letters for families at winter trap lines, orders for goods, a package wrapped in brown paper that had been soft goods once, and was now simply cloth and forgetting. And at the bottom of the third bag, a small flat parcel addressed in a different hand, not to any recipient in particular, but labeled in pencil on the outside, "For the one who finds this, from C. Labelle." The stove was putting out real warmth now. She pulled one arm from her coat sleeve and opened the parcel with both hands. Inside was a short letter, a pocket watch with a cracked crystal, and a photograph. A man in snowshoes standing in front of a cabin that might have been this one or one very like it, grinning at whoever held the camera. The letter said, "If you are reading this, I have not come back for it, and I am sorry for any difficulty that causes. I got turned around in the ice storm of the 14th, and I do not think I will find the track again tonight, and a man who is honest with himself knows when the odds are not in his favor. I have been carrying the mail on this route for 21 years, and I have not lost a bag in that time, and I do not intend to lose these. Please carry the surveyor's case to Orla Fetch at Lac Brûlé. She will know what to do with the land papers. The Sagan family has been waiting 2 years, and they deserve better than more waiting. The watch was my father's. It does not run properly anymore, but I have carried it since I was 19, and I would like it to go to my daughter, Madeline, who is at the school in Mattawa. I went to school one winter with a bookbinder from the Heron Crossing country, a man named Elias Quorn, who was as decent and steady a person as I have met on any route. If any of his people are still in that part of the valley, they are the sort I would trust with this. Travel safely, whoever you are. The ice on the south shore of Lac Brûlé lifts first at the point. You can read it by the color of the water beneath. Cyprien Labelle, carrier, Northern Mattawa route." Faye Callender read the letter once, then she read it again. When she came the second time to the name Elias Quorn, written in the careful hand of a man who had died alone in an ice storm and spent his last careful hours making sure the bags would not be lost. She set the pages flat on her knee and pressed her hand over them and sat for a long time without moving while the fire ticked in the iron stove and the cold pressed at the cedar walls and the surveyor's case sat open on the floor beside her, and she understood without any drama at all that the cabin and the mail bags and the land documents and the pocket watch and the letter had been here waiting in the particular way that certain things wait, not for anyone, but for the one person who would know exactly what to do with them. She folded the letter along its original crease and slid it back into the parcel with the photograph. She wrapped the surveyor's case back in its oilcloth and tied the cord. She set the pocket watch in her coat pocket beside the bone folder, where she would not forget it. Then she shouldered her pack and the surveyor's case and the 3 mail bags, and she walked out into the cold and turned her face northwest toward Lac Brûlé. Orla Fetch, postmistress, was a broad-shouldered woman of about 60, with gray hair pinned severely and hands that had sorted more mail than she could count. When Faye set the 3 canvas bags on the post office counter and laid the surveyor's case beside them, and then laid Cyprien Labelle's letter open on top of that, Orla Fetch did not speak for a long time. She read the 4 pages with her reading glasses down her nose, and her mouth pressed into a line. Then she took off her glasses and said, "So Cyprien is gone then?" Faye said, "3 winters gone from the look of the cabin." Orla Fetch locked the post office, turned the sign, and took Faye into the back room, where she went through the survey folios, one by one on the sorting table, with the attentiveness of a woman who understood exactly what she was looking at. She sent a boy within the hour with a note to the land registry office. She sent a second note to the school in Mattawa regarding a girl named Madeline Labelle. Then she turned to Faye and asked what she meant to do. Faye said she meant to stay, if there was any work. She said she could bind books and repair ledgers and read a survey map to a fair degree of accuracy. She said she asked for honest wages and nothing beyond that. Orla Fetch looked at her for a moment with the expression of a person revising an estimate upward. Then she counted $40 from the post office operating fund as a recovery fee for the mail bags and the documents, and she wrote the transaction into the log under Faye's name, which she asked her to spell. Faye spelled it with the same steady hand she had used to sign Clement Quorn's paper. By the end of the week, word had reached the Sagan family. By the end of the month, a counterclaim had been filed against the Pemberton Timber Company in the Dominion Land Office at Sudbury, and the preliminary review was not going well for Pemberton. Faye took a room above the trading post for $3 a week. She set up a bindery corner in the back of the post office with Orla Fetch's permission, and a workbench built by a carpenter named Hendrik Saar, who was 70 years old, and had strong opinions about the proper height of a workbench, and who charged her fairly for the work and refused to charge for the second coat of varnish, saying only that a good bench deserved a proper finish. Father Dominic Audette, the parish priest, brought her a box of damaged hymnals that had been waiting 3 years for repair, and said there was no particular rush, but that the congregation would be glad to have them back before the Easter services. Madeleine Labelle, 11 years old, arrived by coach from the school in Mattawa, accompanied by a woman from the parish. She accepted the pocket watch from Faye's hand in the post office, back room, and looked at it for a long time online without speaking. Then she turned it over once and put it in her coat pocket and said her father had always told her a cracked crystal didn't affect the time. She supposed that was still true. By her 3rd month in Lac Brûlé, people greeted Faye by name on the main road. Orla Fetch saved her the end piece of the loaf on baking days. Hendrik Soer tipped his hat when he passed the post office window. Children who had heard about the woman who had walked out of the bush with 3 mail bags and a surveyor's case pointed at her from doorways until their parents reminded them that pointing was for people who had never been taught otherwise. One evening in her 4th month, Faye climbed the stairs to the room above the trading post and sat down on the edge of her cot. The window faced south, toward the portage track she had come in on, and the spruce stood dark against a sky gone, the pale green of ice at last light. She had bought a small table for $2. She lit the candle on it and laid out the things that had carried her here. She laid out the bone folder, smooth and certain in the hand, worn now to her own grip, the way it had been worn for so many years to Elias's. The tool he had never formally given her, only taught her to use, which is the only form of giving that holds. Beside it she set Cyprien Labelle's letter, 4 pages of a man's careful honesty, written in a relay cabin in the dark before an ice storm, addressed to no one in particular, and therefore to whoever needed it most. She looked at the 2 objects side by side on the pine table in the candlelight. 2 things from 2 men who had never met each other, and who had not known her as she was now, both of whom had refused, in their separate and unremarkable ways, to leave nothing behind. She thought of Elias Quorn in his good wool coat, counting out $6.40 onto the bindery counter. She thought of him in the doorway of the shop the morning she left, watching her with the expression of a man who has resolved a problem and is already thinking about the next one. She found she could think of him now without particular bitterness, only with a remote and uncomplicated pity. He had signed a paper for a building and a set of tools and believed that was the whole of it. He had not taken the bone folder. He had not taken the 12 years of Elias's teaching, the survey grids and the linen thread, and the knowledge of how to read a document for what it does not say as much as for what it does. He had not taken her steadiness, or her eyes, or her ability to walk north through the Shield country in November and find a cabin no one had been looking for. He had not taken anything that could not be replaced, and he had missed entirely the thing he had no way of knowing was hers to find. Downstairs, the trading post door opened and shut, and someone laughed at something in the warm below, and the smell of wood smoke and pine resin came up through the floorboards the way it did every evening, as regular and dependable as a kept promise. Faye put the bone folder back into the breast pocket of her coat, where it had ridden for 60 miles of portage track and frozen lake shore. She put Cyprien Labelle's letter into the oilcloth beside it, and she went downstairs because supper was on, and she had no intention of missing it. She had walked out of Heron Crossing with $6 in a bone folder and no real destination beyond a name she had heard once across a bindery counter. And those $6 had bought her food for the journey and a pair of dry wool socks from the trader at the Mattawa Junction, and they had been $6 very well spent. She knew that now. Before you go tonight, we want to sit with you here for just a moment. The way Faye sat at that little pine table, with her 2 small objects laid out in the candlelight. Something was taken from her. A building, a set of tools, a room she had slept in for 12 years. The man who took it believed he had resolved the matter entirely. What he could not have known was that the knowledge of how things work, how a page folds, how a document speaks, how a track through the bush can be read, if you are patient enough to let it, was not in the building. It had never been in the building. It was in her hands, and it was going north with her, and there was nothing he could have signed a paper for that would have changed that. We think you might know that feeling. We think some of you have stood at a door that was closing behind you and believed, for amusement, that you were leaving with nothing. Tell us in the comments where you are watching from tonight. And if you're willing, tell us what you carried out that they never thought to count.